Welcome everyone, Costin here with my campaign overview guide for Grombrindal, the White Dwarf, the strongest legendary lord of all of the dwarves, though if you are playing his campaign, you will actually find it much harder than all the other dwarven campaigns to be able to get more legendary lords, because you're very far away from them. However, it should be noted that the other dwarf legendary lords, with the exception of Forgrim, and even then it could go his way, but with the exception of Forgrim, the other dwarf legendary lords have significantly better survivability. In fact, even Forgrim has significantly better survivability because in every campaign that I've played of this game on Legendary Very Hard, Grombrindal gets wiped out. I don't think I've ever seen him survive on this difficulty when controlled by the AI. Whereas Forgrim, sometimes he dies, sometimes he survives against Skarsnik and wipes him out. So effectively, if you're playing Grombrindal, and you're not using mods, of course, like the Defeated Legendary Lords mod, you actually have the highest potential when it comes to confederation with the other dwarf factions. Though it is going to be quite an experience to actually get to the other dwarf factions, especially once the Chaos Dwarves come out. Let's talk about faction effects. Grombrindal starts with 20% weapon strength when fighting against elves, because he hates the Dark Elves in particular. He has an evasion chance when using the Underway, and he has the ability to call upon the power of the Ancestor Gods. Now, the Ancestor Gods is an event that will happen 2 turns in your campaign, and quite a few turns after that, you will get the ability to choose a benefit that Grombrindal has. You can either buff his army's combat potential by quite a bit, buff his own combat potential, his own personal combat potential, buff up his upkeep, or buff up his casualty replenishment by 20%, as well as getting a corruption benefit. The casualty replenishment benefit is the best one to go for, because the dwarves do have a pretty good army when it comes to unresolved, but they do have poor casualty replenishment. So any casualties you take as the dwarves are going to hurt you far more than any other race. So having good casualty replenishment, at least on Grombrindal's army, is significant. But then he gets more faction effects because he has his blue skill line. So most legendary lords have like a generic blue skill line. Grombrindal gets a special blue skill line. He gets 20% income from trade tariffs, recruit rank for all armies faction-wise up to +3, 15% recruit cost reduction, 15% campaign movement range for all characters, 6% casualty replenishment for all characters, and global recruitment capacity, as well as lightning strike. Then he also gets, in his special skill line, 15% campaign movement range, various benefits in battle, like 50% vigor loss reduction, which, by the way, does stack with obstinacy, so you can get minus 65% vigor loss reduction, which is actually pretty absurd. Ammunition for Iron Drakes and War Machine units, melee defense, missile strength for Iron Drakes and War Machines. Though what exactly counts as a war machine, I'm a bit unclear. I don't necessarily think it's artillery, but it might count gyrocopters, gyrobombers. I imagine it is like that. Could be wrong on that, but not entirely certain. Then he gets Grimnir's Resolve, so you get minus 50% cooldown to Grombrindal Has No Fear, and ability number uses +4. Which give you melee defense and unbreakable to allies in range. So you can have a really formidable melee line. Then he gets speed of +35% for his army, armor piercing damage though at the cost of base weapon damage, though it's certainly worth the trade-off. And then you can reduce the time between the Living Ancestor event. Like, if you want to switch from casualty replenishment or just his own combat ability or his army's combat ability, you can do so. He also gets melee defense to Quarrelers and Iron Drake units, reinforcement range, as well as a leadership benefit. The melee defense benefit basically makes it so that Quarrelers in his army are only slightly worse in terms of just pure melee ability than Dwarf Warriors. Though, of course, Dwarf Warriors are significantly cheaper and do have more charge, more leadership, more armor, but like just that melee defense benefits does a lot to bring them almost on par with them. So that is certainly something to keep in mind if you're playing as Grombrindal. Basically, you want to get the Quarreler army, and you're actually in an ideal situation to be able to do so. You start with the tier 1 barracks, but in tier 2 settlement. So in 2 turns, you can start recruiting quarrelers. You can also get an artillery shop over here, in the siege workshop, and get some grudge throwers. I'd probably say about 3 grudge throwers, because you also have the regiment of renown. The reason you want to go for 3 is because you want to give your secondary army, and you're certainly going to want to run with multiple armies. You can give your secondary army at least 1 or 2 of those grudge throwers, and of course use the regiment of renown on Grombrindal. 2 artillery pieces is generally what I'd go for in the early game. Late game, different discussion, but early game, like 2 grudge throwers is really what you need, or what you want, to be able to take down wall towers, take down walls in a reasonable and effective manner. And it also helps that grudge throwers are pretty effective on open field battles as well. So either 2 or 3 grudge throwers, get that pretty quickly in his army, then get rid of the siege workshop, get the money back, some of the money back of course. Like, you just want to recruit this early to be able to get access to siege. Now, campaign situation wise, he starts way over here in the Iron Coast with just the Dracula Spire. And he starts at war with Clan Septic, which Malekith also starts at war with. Now, believe it or not, while a war with Malekith is inevitable, it is not necessarily a guarantee. So just remember that. But because of the grudges, the Master Rune of Spite that you can get, you obviously want to fight Dark Elves, and you want to fight Malekith. And you also want to fight High Elves, most likely Alain, because he's the closest High Elven faction. Though, you could actually end up having a decent enough relationship with Alain, and always having some allies to help you out in your campaign is always useful. So, looking at his starting position, there's an army here controlled by Skaven, a minor army. Then there's a Skaven settlement here at the Eldar Spire, another one at the Altar of Ultimate Darkness, another one here at Actoracto Gorge over there. And also likely another one over here at the mount here, though the ogres are going to take that pretty quickly, I imagine, in their situation. But the Skaven also have a tendency of taking the Temple of Cain or the Deep over here, so actually you're gonna be running around dealing with Clan Septic for quite a bit. And they also control Harkaldra from the very start. These guys have quite a bit of territory, but they're a minor Skaven faction, so they're not really going to be too much of a threat. And they're also at war with quite a few other... they start a war with Malekith and yourself, but other factions will jump in and take the opportunity. So how do you play this campaign? Well, you go over here, you deal with this army. You can out-resolve it, though you can also fight it manually, but look, this is legendary very hard, and take minimal casualties. Now, what you want to get here, you might be tempted to go for Oath Gold. Oath Gold is always useful to get really powerful items for the dwarves, but actually getting Drink to Victory is going to help you out, because the way Drink to Victory works, if we look at the situation, the way Drink to Victory works is that once you get it, its duration is extended when you win more battles. And you kind of want it to be extended because it helps you a lot with your early game growth situation, and that is certainly an issue that the dwarves do have. Now, usually speaking, when it comes to Legendary Lords, I would say that you should always get 1 blue skill line and Inspiring Presence. Now, you still want Inspiring Presence, but in Grombrindal's case, what you're probably going to want to do is get all the points over here in Absolutely Relentless, or maybe get 1 point and then get Tradition and Innovation. Like, Grombrindal's special skill line is good, but you don't necessarily care for all of it. That's something to be important. Like, you care about the Age of Vengeance, Mythical Longevity, but some other skills are not necessarily important. Like Mighty Beard of Defense, not really too important. Rouse the Engineers, sure, great. Mythical Longevity, great. Grimnir's Resolve, not really important. So you actually, unlike many other Legendary Lords, you do want to save some skills. I'd say probably 3 skill points by the time you're 12. So basically, at rank 9, you can save up. Or more like 8, actually. because you're going to want 4 in reality. So you get this skill, then you get 2 skills here, then you get the Age of Vengeance. So at level 8 is when you start saving skills. Now you can obviously go for the campaign movement range, spend all 3 points until level 7 on Absolutely Relentless, but of course there is a benefit in getting Tactician for the Quarreler ammunition. Always important. Quarrelers can actually struggle a bit when it comes to ammunition and prolonged engagements. You also start with a Runesmith, where you want to get the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Of course, damping as well, always useful to have. Like Rune of Wrath and Ruin, 3 points, 1 point in damping. That unlocks Forge Fire. Then you get the Ward Breaker, the Rune of Hearth and Home. And then you spend other points here to be able to strike the runes. The main ability here that matters is the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. Another thing I would also get is, of course, Sharpen Weapons eventually on a Runesmith. Now, once you take this element, what you then do is you start moving north, you recruit units along the way. You want to get Dwarf Warriors and Miners with Blasting Charges. I'd say 2 units of Dwarfs with Blasting Charges can be pretty useful in a battle. Otherwise, just get Dwarf Warriors. Do this for 2 turns, of course. After that, you'll be able to get a bunch of Quarrelers. Once you get a bunch of Quarrelers, that's basically going to be your full stack. Eventually get rid of these Miners. Make sure you have 1 slot open. Get rid of these Miners. When you can get Artillery, get 2 Artillery pieces, the Grunge Throwers. Now, here's what's going to happen. At least on Legendary... very hard difficult. You have this minor Beastman faction, and you kind of want to eliminate this one pretty damn quickly during the course of your campaign. Because otherwise they will be an annoyance, because you want to move east, north and east, but if you do so, and you leave your territory here undefended, it is quite likely that these guys will eventually show up with a full stack when you least expect them. So you want to wipe them out. Now what they generally do is they will move next to the Altar of Ultimate Darkness by the time you arrive there. Now, you can declare war on them in that situation, and they'll show up as reinforcements for the Skaven. Or, dependent if how you've moved, you might even have enough movement points to attack them directly. Though just bear in mind, they do have a tendency to run away from a lot of units. So, if you're attacking the altar, they won't run away. They'll show up as reinforcements, and you can wipe them out or do a significant amount of damage. You might even out-resolve the battle at the altar, but in that case, this army might escape, and you don't want it to escape. When you're dealing with Beastmen, the best thing you can do, if you have a lot of movement points, and remember, you do have a lot of movement points potential as Grombrindal, plus 30%, you do want to ensure that you can chase them down, of course, because when you fight the battle the first time, some are going to get away. You don't want to get them away because they're just going to hide away in a camp stance. It's going to be hard to deal with them. The most ideal situation when dealing with Beastmen is to just auto-resolve the battle against them, because they have a bad auto-resolve situation. By the way, take the Altar of Ultimate Darkness, try and wipe out the Beastmen, or maybe not, really. You don't have to do this instantly. You could actually decide to wait on that until you have the opportunity to be able to chase them down. Just bear in mind, there are nuisance. They have to be dealt with then. At that point, you can move over here in the Rakdo Gorge, and I would take this element. The Skaven are probably going to have quite a few forces over here, and you can either keep this for yourself, or you can sell it to the Ogre to get some cash. One of the problems in Grombrindal's campaign is that he doesn't actually have any allies, with the exception of Katep. Like, you can get along quite well with Katep, but all the other factions over here are either not worth allying, like the Ogres here won't achieve much, so they're not worth allying, or they hate you, or they have a significant aversion. Now, so selling this territory to the Ogres can give you a benefit, and the Ogres can actually act as a distraction tool against Taurox, because Taurox is likely going to declare war on these Ogres very, very quickly. And raise, they'll take this, the Ogres will take this element, and Taurox will show up, burn it to the ground, or the Skaven will take it back. So giving this provincial capital to the Ogres, some money, some potential over here. Now, when it comes to dealing with Malekith, your best bet, and it depends on the situation. Sometimes if you can find his army out of position, or if you wait a bit, he will eventually start making his way towards the Skaven capital. You want to choose the moment well. Like, you can either take a more passive advance, though obviously playing as the Dwarves because of Drink to Victory, it is ideal to keep moving, to keep the momentum. In general, it's better to keep moving. But personally, what I do is move for Haldra, then move on from Haldra to Nagrand. Now, bear in mind that there's a fairly significant distance here. You might be able to lure one of Malekith's army by getting a second army, moving Grombrindal in an ambush stance, and putting that second army like in forced march stance to lure them towards you. As a dwarf, legendary lord, you also have a very high chance of getting Gotrek and Felix pretty early on in your campaign, and oh boy, will they be useful if you do so. So just bear that in mind. But either way, take Nagrand, eliminate Malekith, then eventually deal with Hag Grief, deal with the situation over here, and deal with Taurox. But what about Valkia? Well, one of the ways to ensure Valkia is not going to be a menace from the very start of your campaign is if you move quickly enough, because she starts over here. If you move quickly enough, you can take some of this province, maybe the Chill Road. You can take this pretty quickly in your campaign and sell it to her. And from my experience, even though there's obviously a very high level of aversion, from my experience when dealing with Chaos factions, or any factions, any faction, is if you sell them a territory, they're far less likely to declare war on you. Though AI is also scripted, by the looks of it, to always want to take certain territories. So Valkia always wants to take Rond. And you should be aware of that, because if you start taking this province yourself, you're almost certainly going to end up in a war with Valkia. And the problem with that isn't even necessarily Valkia herself, it's also her vassals who can attack your under-defended territories over here. You won't have a huge economy, you don't have trading partners, so you may end up in a situation where your core territories get raided and destroyed, and then you also have to deal with Valkia's main army. When it comes to dealing with Valkia's main army, my suggestion is mass quarrelers will take her down, but it's going to take some time. And then if you strike early enough, you can eliminate her army before it becomes too powerful. Or you can take some of the territory here in the Spiteful Peaks, depending on how quickly you move. Hell, you might even ignore the Skaven over here and just decide to go for Malekith if you want to be really aggressive. But if you sell her some territory, she's gonna move east. It would be ideal in your campaign if you had some kind of detente between yourself and Valkia, because what then happens is she likely ends up at war with Hellebrand. She may win that war, she may lose that war, but that's not important because it gives you time to expand across the territory over here. Although, if you end up at war with Valkia, that is going to give you a lot of money, and you do need a lot of money to be able to grow your settlements, because these settlements are going to start at very low level. Eventually, the ogres get wiped out, or you wipe them out yourself. You should not get the non-aggression pact or anything like that with these guys. You actually want to wipe them out yourself. You just want to get some money by selling them this capital, even if you have to take it back later on, which isn't really a substantial issue. You can ally Katep. Just bear in mind one thing. If you're trying to avoid a war between yourself and Valkia, by allying Katep, which is not difficult, actually, you sell him a province, or let's say you eventually deal with ogres and you sell this territory to Katep, he's likely going to want to ally you there, or get some agreement of some description. The problem is, for whatever reason, I've noticed that if you do that, and this is not just something that applies to Grombrindal's campaign, it also applies in Malekith's campaign, but if you do that, there's a high chance that Valkia, especially if she has territory on this, like the moment she sees Katep might instantly declare war on her, or Valkia may instantly declare war on Katep. And you're stuck in the middle, having to actually fight that war with the AI faction that just got declared war on, being the one that doesn't have to do anything. Now, expansion-wise, your best bet is to not necessarily get involved in a war with Hellebrand if you can avoid it, because if you get involved in a war with Hellebrand, you're going to have to fight everyone here in the north, and the Chaos Wasteland is not good climate. I'd probably raise these settlements to the ground, or sack them, occupy them, and abandon them. That might be the best bet. But you should basically stop your expansion of territory at about this point, at this particular settlement. Like, this territory is good, it can be very useful, it can generate a lot of money, but of course it's got the issue that you have Sigvald on one side, Valky on another, and other factions over here in the Castaway. So, if you're going for this territory, just be aware of the downsides. Maybe you actually draw the line over here at the Road of Skulls. Obviously, a lot of things can happen in a particular campaign. But you should wipe out Malekith and then go deal with a Life Fanar, or you can delay dealing with a High Elven Grudge and just do that on a minor faction, because you can potentially maintain really good relations with the Life Fanar, and having good relations with the High Elves can actually help you out a lot in your campaign. Now, there's huge potential in the Obsidian Peaks, there's potential over here. If there's a tip I would give you in any campaign is wiping out the Sisters of Twilight is really the way to go. The reason you don't care about the Sisters of Twilight is because they are not so useful as an ally. The reason behind that is allies won't really help you out in a war unless they have a direct link of territory to the front line, so to speak. Well, the Sisters, they may only have this particular province, and even then, they might sell it to you if you get the military alliance. It might even give you for a very cheap amount. But the thing about that is, they're not going to really aid you. They're going to have limited armies. They're not going to help you a lot. In fact, the Wood Elf AI in general is pretty bad in terms of being a useful ally. So what I've come to the conclusion is in every campaign that starts around here, you basically want to wipe the Sisters out, get their defeat trait, sack the Witchwood, take the Witchwood, give it to Kotep, like let him make use of it. Then march over here down south, deal with Morathi. Dealing with Morathi will give you all of this territory in your campaign, though just bear in mind the issues in the north. How you decide to deal with the situation in the north is up to you. You could potentially take out Valkyria and make some kind of deal with Hellebrand if you want to. She can be a really powerful ally when controlled by an AI. When you control her, she's not really a great legendary lord to control, but as an ally, she can be great. And yes, I know, significant aversion between dwarves and Dark Elves, but not so significant that you can't overcome it and make an alliance. But by the way, you won't really care if you wipe out Malekith. You want to wipe out Malekith. Though, similarly speaking, a Lief Anar can be an absolute pain to deal with, and probably better as an ally, because his particular province is obviously going to border Be'lakor. Dealing with Be'lakor can be a genuine nuisance. Now, beyond taking the territory next to you, what do you want to do in the rest of this campaign? You obviously want to make your way back to Dwarflands, but you have several options to do so. You could obviously take this territory, then hop onto Albion, and then move through the mountains over here through Bretonnia. Bretonnia will like it if you wipe out Be'lakor, move through this territory. The issue is that obviously this exposes a lot of your territory, and you're going to have to make dealings as you go through this territory, and eventually reach Belegar and others. But this isn't a great option because you're going to have to move for a lot of territory and dealing with factions that you don't necessarily want to end up at war with. Or you could, but a lot of the territory here is not suitable. An alternative to that campaign plan, and looking at the victory conditions, you do need to wipe out Malekith, but you don't have to deal with any particular province. But you may want to go to the Dwarvenlands. Well, the best way to do it is take the sea lane from Nagarond, then come over here, maybe taking some territory to sell to Mazamundi, and ending up in Cathay. Now, Cathay is a bit of a mixed bag of territory for you as Grombrindal, but by this point, you should only do this once you've taken basically all of Nagarond, so you should have a substantial economy. What you're really interested in doing here is making your way into the Mountains Morn, making your way into the Darklands, dealing with the Chaos Dwarves, and eventually ending up in the territory of the dwarves themselves, which will obviously allow you confederation options with Thorgrim, Ungrim, and others. It can be quite a journey of a campaign, to be honest. Very, very long, but I would say it probably is a very rewarding campaign if you're playing a very long campaign, just going from all the way in the far west to the far east, and then making your way into the center of the map in the Badlands, confederating the dwarf factions as well, and also kicking Lokir out of Cathay, destroying him potentially, taking some territory, maybe making an alliance with Cathay itself, and then obviously Mountains of Morn, Cast Dwarves, we'll see who ends up winning. I think what's interesting to see with the Cast Dwarf DLC and when it comes out is which AI faction is actually going to become the dominant one over here in the Darklands. Because right now, what usually happens is Emmerich tends to become a dominant faction. He defeats Stretch, he then ends up fighting Queek, but he usually doesn't lose that. In fact, he might even win that particular conflict. Greasus doesn't amount to much. Gorse does take some territory, but then he kind of struggles against the combination of Cathay to the east and Emmerich to the west. So Emmerich is actually the one that becomes the strongest faction over here at the moment. But of course, that's not going to last with the changes they're obviously making to the Darklands and the addition of the Cast Dwarf Legendary Lords. Anyway, that's all there is to say. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.